Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. This is your host, Dan Turchin, advisor at Insight Finder, System of Intelligence for IT Operations, and CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Thanks again to all of you, our listeners, for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep bringing you great conversations ad-free. We often talk about how and why data is the lifeblood of AI. In fact, all AI is really a data challenge. And a combination of, call it data hygiene and data wrangling, actually occupy most of a data scientist or AI engineer's time. More important, data quality is the single biggest factor that determines the accuracy of automated decisions, something few people outside of the space appreciate. And we've talked to Bar Moses from Monte Carlo and Derek Steer from Mode Analytics about exactly this challenge on previous episodes. Well, they taught us the importance of managing data, and they shared insights into the future of data pipelines. Well, today, we get a real treat. We get to meet another expert in the field. Peter Fishman, who goes by Fish, has been at the forefront of data pipeline innovation for over a decade, having wrangled data with the best at Playdom, which was acquired by Disney. Then in the early years at Yammer, before it was acquired by Microsoft. Fish co-founded Mozart Data a couple years ago to make sophisticated data pipelines accessible to everyone else. Fish and the team are off to an amazing start, having graduated from the YC Summer 2020 batch, launching a product and deploying it to customers like Rippling and Zeppelin. Fish is going to teach us not just about his entrepreneurial journey, but also about the future of data analytics. Before launching his data career, Fish did his undergrad at Duke and then his PhD at Cal in economics. Without further ado, it really is my pleasure to welcome Fish to the podcast. Fish, let's go ahead and get started by having you share a little bit about your background and how you got into the space.
Well, thanks, Dan, for having me. Like you mentioned, I've been sort of in the data space for the better part of the last 2 decades, shortly after finishing up my PhD. I'm something of a failed academic that made that transition to technology and have been bouncing around early, late, and then public company, early and late stage startups, then public companies for the last 2 decades. And about 18 months ago, we're a COVID company. We started shortly after the pandemic. My good friend Dan and I founded Mozart Data. So Mozart Data is the easiest way to spin up a modern data stack. And I'll talk a little bit about what I think of as, a data stack or data pipelines, throughout the episode. But the idea is that we basically do a lot of the rote data engineering work that you would typically hire an engineer or a data engineer to do like early in your company. And instead, now this is a process that tools like Mozart handle.
So Fish, we're getting to know each other last week at dinner, and I'm asking you about Mozart. And I made a comment about who I thought your target customer might be. And you're like, no, actually, everyone needs a data pipeline. And that kind of challenged, some of, my perhaps antiquated ideas about who needs a data pipeline. Why does every business need one?
Not every business technically, gets value out of their data, but most can. And in order to get really the value out of the data, it has to not cost you that much to analyze it. So a lot of companies early on have heavy manual processes to get at core answers. I mean, everybody, there's this sort of wave of talking about being data driven, but really what it is making very informed, very smart decisions, because ultimately you're competing in whatever field it is that you're competing, and having that data puts you typically at an advantage, or it allows you to sort of shift a little bit what you're doing to sort of go more in the direction of what the market is telling you or what customers want. So really, even early on, companies can get incredible advantages from their data. It's maybe how they want to invest their marketing dollars, or what part of the product is resonating with users. Uh, the problem tends to be that you don't see many companies implementing sort of data-driven strategies because getting that data is expensive and difficult. And historically, it took hiring a few folks, not just somebody to analyze the data, a data analyst, but also a data engineer, someone to extract and load the data. And now you have tools that have come along that have tried to make it easier to analyze your data. And typically, when you buy a SaaS tool, within that tool is some sort of either data export or even graph that will tell you something core about what you're doing. So if you're running a direct-to-consumer business, there's almost certainly a chart of your revenue or a chart of your customers in something like Shopify or a platform like it. So now, earlier and earlier, tools are enabling you to leverage your data to have a just sort of a barometer for where things are, but also to figure out kind of what are the opportunities, for your business. Why people need data pipelines is that often that data needs to get cleaned up. So, a story that I like to tell is that, Dan and I, 10 years before founding Mozart Data, started a hot sauce company, Bacon Hot Sauce, the world's first bacon flavored hot sauce. And we didn't do a lot of data analysis to figure out kind of things about the company in terms of its direction. Its direction was bacon. But what we did do, like we wanted to know generally, we'd have to make orders for the number of bottles that we'd have. And, the Christmas season was always our biggest selling season. So, you'd have to make a projection based on, how maybe we did in previous seasons. And so those were like sort of data questions that we might ask. But I think a key thing to understand is we always had to take out people whose last name was Fishman or Silberman. So, you wanted to like scrub the data of like my mom, who would be like the biggest buyer of the hot sauce. And, obviously that's very, it's sort of an easy to consume example of why it might be misleading to sort of think about your sales, including like all of our family sales, because that part like won't scale up over time. So the reason that you need a data pipeline is to clean the data using sort of the knowledge that you have that might not be readily available to a tool like Shopify, or generally the use of it is when you have multiple data sources. So data pipelines start when you're using essentially data from multiple places. So that can be multiple SaaS tools, that can be a database, that can be a CSV file, that can be a variety of things. But like where I think of the power of data pipelines, I'm thinking typically about using data from multiple places and combining it in a central place.
So Yammer is not exactly bacon flavored hot sauce, but when you started at Yammer, a social network for enterprises, I imagine it wasn't obvious what the role of a statistician was in that organization. Before we have what I think you'd call in Silicon Valley today, very much a data-driven culture, what was it like to be able to unlock the power of data in an organization like Yammer that wasn't a data company per se?
Yeah, so if we're going to rewind the clock way back, in this case, 12 years, 13 years, it wasn't very commonplace for B2B companies to have like internal data people, right? So especially startups, obviously big organizations like Google and Microsoft would have data people, but like a startup like Yammer, which was a very successful, sort of mid-stage startup at the time, that had some traction, that had some product market fit, that was growing. I give a ton of credit to the founders, David Sachs and Adam Pizzoni, to be forward-looking and say to themselves, we need to develop this B2B application like a consumer application. And the bar that has changed is that the B2B bar, which used to be, you would have relationships with CIOs, and then you would sell to those folks, has changed in this world where now you see a lot more bottom-up SaaS, where you're selling to individuals. Individuals fall in love with your SaaS tools, and then organizations adopt them. So it was a very forward-looking vision to say, okay, let's think about building B2B products in a B2C way. Now, it wasn't uncommon for B2C companies to really analyze their data. So you had mentioned, that I had worked at Disney. I had worked in video games at Playdom, and for those sort of social video games, it was core to what we did to analyze every single click, to really understand, okay, what were users doing? What happens when we give users, variant A and variant B? Which one was more successful? So a lot of kind of my career got started when B2B companies started to think in a B2C way. I mean, now as the sort of founder of a B2B company, it's almost like, oh, it's such a shame that the world has raised its expectations for B2B development. But I think that's amazing. I think like on net, this is incredible that now the types of tools that we use at work are no longer told to us, okay, you're going to use this tool, and then essentially you have a lot more competition, a lot better tooling in the sort of workplace. So so this revolution towards making sort of B2B products consumable, and for me as a non-designer, even like the design bar, the product bar, all of these bars have massively raised. But then it sort of coincided with, to make those better, you don't just need to hire, more designers. You don't just need to hire more product people. You actually want to hire, like myself, statisticians, typically called data analysts, data scientists, to really figure out what's working and what's not within the product.
So I imagine you learned a thing or two from David Sachs, who's legendary as one of perhaps the most successful startup operator, having been kind of a founding member of the PayPal mafia, and obviously he's gone on to great success beyond that. Tell us the David Sachs story. What was it like being a data guy at a David Sachs company?
Well, it's always sort of daunting when you can like walk into the room as the data person and get really grilled in a data way. I mean, David obviously is famous in the Valley for being amazing at both product and operations, and that's sort of a unique. Typically you find folks that are great at maybe one, and that's even special. But like it's very unique that you have both, and that's kind of the founding philosophy of his venture fund Craft, who invested in Mozart, and also Adam, my former boss at Yammer, also and co-founder of Yammer, was also an investor in Mozart. So it's great to have that support of sort of, we call it not the PayPal mafia, but the Yammer mafia in some sense, to sort of back kind of what we're doing. And what we're doing is obviously bringing a lot of sort of the same tools that were sort of inspired from what we had built at Yammer, what we had spent millions and millions of dollars on building at Yammer, the types of tools that really empowered my team there, and bringing those now to earlier stage companies. But being put on the spot for maybe a Sachs story, I think he's kind of like a little bit of like a legendary poker player. And one of the things that I like remember is that like he had a run where he got into open face poker. Pineapple is the name of the game, and we would just play till all hours like of the night and being like very competitive. And for me, it was like it sort of strips the game of being partially like bluffing, or partially sort of the psychological component. So to me, it was like an all sort of math and analytics game, and I was always trying to get the better of him because that's kind of my wheelhouse, and I could never sort of I could never sort of top his scores, and that was always sort of super frustrating to me as a data person because it's my wheelhouse. So obviously a ton of respect for the leadership we had at Yammer. We had an incredible group there, and many of them have gone on to really great things. And then many of we actually have a few folks at Yammer that today work at Mozart. So it all comes full circle, and the Valley ends up being like a really small place.
I mentioned that we've talked to Bar from Monte Carlo and Derek from Mode, and specifically about the target persona that those companies sell to, kind of the rise of this citizen data analyst. I'm guessing, maybe I'm wrong here, but that the target customer profile for Mozart is a little different, and you may not necessarily be targeting a citizen data analyst. Who's the target user for Mozart?
Well, I think like the sort of citizen data analyst is certainly who we think of as the target user. What that means is probably a little bit different for those three companies. Obviously, a lot of respect for and get to work with a number of customers that use, Monte Carlo or Mode. We're internally we do analytics with Mode, and I have a lot of pride in Mode. So, like I mentioned, the team was the Yammer team built an internal tool called Avocado, which ultimately got used at Microsoft by tens of thousands of users. And Avocado today kind of was the inspiration for Mozart for data pipelining and Mode for BI and analytics. And I think of that tool as having, similar users. I think one of the things with Mode and Monte Carlo that's a little bit different from Mozart is Mozart looks for that citizen data analyst, typically at an earlier stage company. What we're trying to solve is that citizen data analyst might not have a data engineering team to empower them. It is the case that I think all three of these companies, but especially ours, are massively helped by the sort of tailwinds of more and more people becoming data fluent in tech. Like it forever been sort of a table stakes type uh, skill that people would say, oh well, it's really really important that data, you're data driven, you can analyze data. And in finance, everybody knows Excel and spreadsheets, and G Sheets. And now so many more people are sort of comfortable, working effectively in SQL or sort of manipulating data in a database and just sort of thinking about sort of tables the right way. So we're all taking advantage of the sort of tailwinds of more and more people becoming data savvy. And to that end, you see more and more people consuming data and consuming lots of it. And then once you start doing that, you need ways of organizing it and thinking about it. And you need tools that sort of help you or speed you up in that process. A lot of what we do is solve for, sort of replacing a report that maybe takes, somebody in FP&A, 3 hours to build at the end of every month, when it should be a one-click refresh in a tool like Mode. But how do you essentially get the data from the three places and replace the VLOOKUP with a join, and so that instead of the data taking 3 hours to be fresh, you can one click update it and it's there in seconds. So that's really kind of what we think of as one of the killer sort of early stage features. But again, like you said, all of us are sort of targeting this new population that is just, it grows effectively by the day, which is folks that have worked at companies where they've seen great data, like data infrastructure and data tables in place so that people can get answers quickly, get addicted to that. And they want it at their next company. And I think that's kind of what's caused the rise of so many of these new data startups, which is it's obsoleting work that used to be very manual and now is clearly very sort of solved by technology.
We talk a lot on this show about automating manual processes using AI. So finding patterns in a lot of data and then replicating the process that otherwise would require humans. Fast forward 10 years, across kind of the spectrum of tasks that we've talked about so far, data hygiene, data wrangling, ETL jobs, things like that. What will humans be doing in the kind of space of data analysis, and what will be fully automated?
It's always tough to make predictions about the future, but it's really almost unthinkable to me what data looks like. If I give a 10-year look back, and essentially the resources that you'd have to pour into doing sort of, like you said, some basic ETL versus like today, what's now a few button clicks because of so much standardization. Um, if I had to make a wager, I might go against the current and say that there will still be, a lot of human involvement in data. The way that I think about it is, I like playing chess. The best, many people think that like Magnus Carlsen is, say, the best chess player in the world. And that's, not true. And maybe they think, Google Brain is, or something like that. That's not true. It's actually the combination of a human sort of managing sort of basically, a chess machine. And I think it's basically going to look something like that for maybe not 10 years, but I think maybe even more. So I guess my bold prediction will be, what humans will be doing is, labeling data and still sort of the same problems that we think of as the most important today are still about understanding the business question and the impact the data can have, before it is to solve for, necessarily what is the best technical answer. So, in the example I would give is like, again, if I went back to the hot sauce example and I wanted to understand who's like the most likely person to buy hot sauce, you would start, you would buy a list of everybody whose last name is Fishman, and you would just essentially hit them, with a marketing drip campaign. And that's not, that would be a sort of incorrect conclusion. Now, of course, if you set it up the wrong way, there's many ways to do garbage in, garbage out type conclusions. What I think of as what you see is that a lot of the very standard parts of data analysis are very much getting solved and automated. So I'd brag. So when I worked at Zenefits, we were the first customer of Fivetran. And what we had hired Fivetran to do was move data from Salesforce to Redshift. And why didn't we do it ourselves? Well, this company seemed like a great way to solve that problem, and they've of course gone on to really great things, and are a great partner of Mozart Data. So when I think about that problem, now Fivetran has hundreds of connectors. Right. So they haven't just solved the Salesforce to Redshift problem. They've solved, many, variants of it. So what I think you'll continue to see is, that number will explode. But while those connections, while that EL or ETL is exploding, you're seeing more and more SaaS tools come along. That when we talk to customers, they typically have a number of very standard connections, very standard. Well, we use Salesforce. I've heard of that one. We use HubSpot. I've heard of that one. We use Google. Like, I've heard of that one. We use, and then they name 4 or 5 things. I'm like, okay, those are pretty much down the center of the plate. Then they always say, and we use Zippity Doodah. I'm like, well, what is that? And I think basically you'll never be able to build connections faster than these tools sprout. So I think a lot of more of the, call it the short tail, will continue to get solved incrementally, and maybe at an increasing pace. But I think you'll see this challenge of the long tail like growing faster than ever sort of imaginable.
So Mozart's responsible for ETLing all of this data from disparate sources into one place and making it easy to access, analyze, etc. Who's responsible if the way that the data is wrangled and stored and accessed is used to make poor decisions? In some cases, you could envision decisions that have potentially life-altering consequences. From a data security and a data integrity and a data analysis perspective, what responsibilities does Mozart own for the downstream decisions made?
So, I mean, Mozart does have a very opinionated view of the world, which is we want to handle the rote parts of data engineering. And then once sort of data lives within a data warehouse, sort of in typically raw or raw-ish form, we see each company as its own unique snowflake, with like a bad pun intended. And this is the challenge. I mean, we, again, going back to empowering the citizen data analyst, we think of that person as being responsible for understanding their business, being able to translate their business questions into math or SQL, and then figuring out an action on top of that. And that is what companies should compete on. They shouldn't compete on how do I efficiently get my data from this standard tool to this standard database. And I think like we think of our challenge as setting that person up for success more so than making sure they do the right things downstream. Now, there are tons of data governance and privacy and security concerns that we take incredibly seriously, that we think of as part of the core of what both we do and what a data warehouse solution does. In our case, under the hood, we do use Snowflake. So I think that like I don't want to like punt on your question to say we bear no responsibilities if you misuse the data downstream. But yeah, I think that so I do think that like, having good best practices and good training are things that you can help provide teams downstream. We also do love giving our customers a real push in the back in terms of building core tables. And a lot of times when you build the right core tables, it's much easier to not just get answers downstream, but to get consistent answers downstream, which is often where the problems come up. But we've all had snafus and mistakes in terms of the way we've reported on data. I've had many in my career. Some are very painful to me. Some are sort of like jokes in hindsight. But I would say that that's, it's not like that's going to happen in a business. But that's one of the reasons why largely humans still make decisions. It's because these decisions are dependent on the assumptions that you're making about your data quality, and and I think that we try to help you get all the way to the point where more people can be looking at that data. So when you leave that data to just essentially the most, skilled, say, engineers or data scientists to access, well, now you've restricted the set of people that can argue about some of the core underlying assumptions that are going into the model that's being built to project an answer or to make a prediction. But when you democratize it to the citizen data scientists, you're much more likely, if you're adopting best practices, you're much more likely, in my mind, to see better answers.
Is it fair to say that once you ETL the data and establish the pipeline through these kind of rote data engineering tasks, you're not seeing the SQL that they're running off of the data that you've wrangled, right?
So we do have a transform layer, right? So we think of the challenge as being ELT. So I don't go in and personally check people's SQL and look at. So it is sort of managed within the Mozart system. So I mean, pardon the bad pun, but the Mozart system is about orchestrating the data. And it's about, obviously not just bringing the data together, but like obviously making it work in harmony, composing your tables. But I think what we're trying to do, so I don't sort of look over people's shoulders in a creepy way, nor should I. So, but there are, again, one of the key steps before you use a tool like Mode or like, Looker or Tableau or many of the BI tools. Before you do that, if you can essentially clean your data and have a business user that understands, okay, like we got to like throw out the fake accounts and we got to throw out, the hot sauce buyers with, my last name. If you can do that, you're gonna solve a big set of those problems that you typically see downstream. So you see tools like Mode and Looker have their own layer that looks similar to this. So in Looker, it's called LookML. It's very clear you want consistent definitions. Otherwise, you get multiple answers. And we think of our layer as making that easier for organizations. And when you do, I think a big part, I'm an economist by trade. You mentioned that from the top, but a big part of our belief is that, you don't have to just make it accessible. You have to make it easier to do. And it's like, how do you make working out easier? Like that's a big part of getting somebody to do a workout. It's just lowering sort of the barrier to entry. And that's kind of how we think about a lot of what we do at Mozart.
The personal trainer for your data.
It's sad to say that the biggest challenge in data, and with all respect to past guests, but I think the biggest challenge in data is just getting started. I think it's, by the way, as a practitioner, there are many, many challenges, and I'm sure you see downstream data challenges, but I will say the biggest challenge in my eyes, and the problem that we wanted to go after, was helping teams get started.
So I got to get us to a stopping point in a few minutes, but I'd like you to leave us with a story. So whether it's a Rippling, a Zeppelin, a customer story that you're proud of, that you feel like is a good example of how everyone's going to use a tool like Mozart in the future.
Let's go with one of our earliest customers, Tempo. So, Tempo is a fitness tool that massively took off during the pandemic, and for very obvious reasons. So they had incredible amounts of data that they were collecting. It was, being collected from many different sources. And I got that real moment of product market fit, kind of working with an analyst there and actually kind of seeing their face light up with delight. And there's no more rewarding. So I mean, look, there are moments where you sign a big contract, or there are moments where you make a great hire, which are like typically your successful business metrics, or you raise money, or there's a cool article about you. Those aren't the real things. The real thing is I'm on a Zoom call with a data analyst at a company that's experiencing something that I know is a real problem. Like I can picture myself as being hired by Tempo to be their data analyst. And I can picture myself, there's all these things, and the business is growing so incredibly rapidly due to an external shock and due to some of the excellence of their technology. And you have all of these problems, and I can just picture executives asking a thin team all of these questions and needing answers and relying on those answers for driving the strategy. But you can, so we do things kind of, I describe it like superhuman, where we give people a push in the back. So we get them to set up their core tables, and seeing that moment. And we have a little joke where when you write your first table, it actually plays Eine kleine Nachtmusik. So your create table statement is just a big blue button, and it'll play the Mozart song because we're kind of corny like that. But actually, it wasn't the person reacting to the song. It was the person then querying that table in their BI tool and actually watching that. And then even just that select star statement is just an awesome feeling. And I've gotten to experience it a number of times. And then it really clicks for the person, where the person understands kind of exactly what it is we do. I recently, you mentioned Zeppelin. I recently did a webinar with the head of growth at Zeppelin, and the head of growth was explaining kind of his philosophy of why he chose Mozart. And it was like a really great articulation of everything that we had put into our YC pre-demo, our YC application pitch. And so seeing that in reality is incredibly rewarding. I mean, these are real moments for me, real moments of pride.
Love that answer. That feature of creating first table reminds me of my first experience using Trello. And it's a configuration in Trello, but you can set it up so that when you close a task, a unicorn flies across the screen. And I always thought that was brilliant, because I got this little endorphin shot whenever I close a task.
one
So
of our most requested and unrequested features, like shorten that music down. So Dan and I fought about that for a while, but we really love it too. It's a real point of pride for us.
beautiful. I can't let you off the hot seat without answering one last question, and that's what's going on your epitaph? Is it that this is the guy who brought data pipelines to the masses, or this is the inventor of the bacon flavored hot sauce? Which one?
Well, I'm certainly there's no way that bacon hot sauce is not going on the tombstone. That said, I think there that would be. I've been really fortunate to be part of this great wave where like a lot of data resources became a lot less expensive, and a lot of companies really sought after like data people. Like everybody's seen that graph of sort of data jobs in the last sort of 15 years, and just what's happened with the industry. So my hope is to continue to democratize that and make the challenges really about thinking critically about data and rewarding that. So I want to continue to be part of that data story, and just that incredible growth in terms of like capabilities, but sort of the bar for entry.
Look, it'll be a big tombstone, all right? It'll
Great.
be room enough for both.
Please. Yeah, I hope so.
I love it. Well, Fish, you're a real pioneer in the data
Thank you
space,
so much.
and I hope you'll come back and talk about some of these trends as they evolve in the future.
Would love to.
Excellent. Love this conversation. That's a wrap for today. This is your host, Dan Turchin of AI and the Future of Work, and we're back next week with another fascinating guest.